So, what first inspired Missouri's project to reduce rules?
So it was the voices of advocates and survivors. But back in 2006, we formally were doing some regional meetings. So in Missouri, we have our state broken up into 7 regions, and at least quarterly there would be these regional meetings, and they would consist of us doing the statewide report. We'd hear program updates from the programs, and then there was normally some sort of facilitated discussion or training kind of attached with the meeting. So in 2006, we ran a whole series on rules in shelter. It's not the first time we'd heard about it. I mean, everybody knows the first shelter that ever opened, probably conversation that happened shortly thereafter was, we're going to have some rules. So, I mean, rules are just a common conversation. But what we had asked folks to do was, could you bring some of your handbooks that have the rules, let's talk about it. What are you struggling with? What works? And, they were some really good conversations. There were some kind of funny things that came out of it too, because you definitely could tell the stories behind some of the rules without even asking. So for example, and I will not out any program except to say there was a program that I was looking at their handbook, and it said, you cannot eat Cheetos in your room. I went ahead and asked, can you tell me about this? Even though I could play that story out in my head. But it started because there was a child that had Cheetos. And I believe instead of doing what I think should have happened, where you would normally lick all of that fantastic cheesy dust off your fingers, they painted the walls with it. And that stuff is oily and also stains. And of course, they had to repaint and clean and that kind of thing. So it became, you can't eat Cheetos in the room. If you really start to dissect that, do you really need that rule? Probably not. But I understood where it at least came from. But so there were conversations like that. It was our very last regional meeting for that series. And our COO, Cheryl Robb Welch, and I were going to Cape Girardeau and the meeting was being hosted there, which is in the southeast corner of the state, and it's a several-hour drive there. We're doing the meeting, everything's going great, and there's an advocate who hadn't said something for a while, and then all of a sudden just sits up, and it's like, oh, this is either going to be, I don't know, really angry sounding or very profound. I couldn't tell by what was about ready to happen. But what she said was profound, because what it turned out, she was like, we've been having conversation about rules for the 10 years I've been an advocate. We either need to do something about it or stop talking about it. And on the drive back then from Cape Girardeau, which is about 3 to 4 hour drive, Cheryl and I were like, could you have a shelter without rules? And so it really did become this idea on a long car ride home. And by the time we had hit Jeff City, we had identified programs around the state that we knew were already either currently talking about it or we were pretty sure would be open to being a part of something. We had come up with an outline of wanting to make sure that we had a program from each region represented and of varying sizes. So we would have from the 100-bed shelter to, I think the smallest that participated in the original project was maybe like a 6 to 7 bed shelter. So we had urban and rural represented. I mean, we had it across the state because we didn't want it to be something where it's like, oh, well, that's the big city shelter. They've got more resources than we do, sitting in the middle of nowhere. So we wanted that all represented. And then in 2007 is when we had our first meeting with these 7 programs that were identified. We asked them, would they give us a year? It was very critical, I think, that the coalition wasn't going to tell programs how to do this. Every program looks a little different. and their staffing looks a little different. Their organizations look different. Their sizes are different. Their resources are different. So what we said was, would you bring your handbooks, your rules? Would everybody at least agree to do that? Look at them. And will you agree to start looking at what can you reduce to go forward in this? So we weren't telling them how, it was just, will you do this with us and we'll support it. We also in Missouri, I think, have really, I mean, it's a coalition. We have based our work on partnerships and communication with our member organizations. It can't work any other way. I don't know how to be a coalition without those relationships. So we have to make sure that people knew that some of these conversations might get a little uncomfortable too. And this was not punitive. This was about, no, how do we support each other through this? Shelter work is hard. I mean, there's no doubt about that. It's 24/7. It's the challenges that are there are not getting any easier. And we needed to make sure that people were willing to communicate with each other, but with us, and that we were there to support. And that, like I said, this wasn't punitive. We weren't trying to catch people doing something wrong. It was being willing to have just the conversation and be supportive of each other through it. And so it was really fascinating. And after the first meeting, even, what was interesting about it is they all kind of left the table with different ways they were taking this back to the programs, their programs. Several of them were like, we're gonna go ahead and work staff together and be like, okay, what can we keep? What do we have to keep? What can we get rid of? Those kinds of things. There was one program, I do not advise this. I do not advise an executive director just to go back and just announce to the entire staff, we have no more rules. Don't do that. That is bad. That's just not a good way to do it. I appreciated the enthusiasm, but you got to get some buy-in before you can just do all of that stuff. And then there was one of the executive directors we had at the table, and this is somebody who I've known for a really long time. And again, it was one of those moments of like, oh my gosh, we may have lost her somehow. She hasn't said a word, and she is normally talkative kind of thing. She was processing all of it. And what she said, I love, which was, you know what? Why do we have a resident handbook? Why don't we have instead something that tells residents what they can expect from us, instead of us giving them something that always is like, here's what we expect of you. Mm-hmm. And it was just a different way of seeing it. And it was like, oh my God, that's brilliant. I love it, kind of thing. So that's really, it started from the work of advocates that they were already doing, that the stuff they were already struggling with as far as rules, the feedback they get from survivors, bringing a group of people that were willing to take a chance and really examine it. And then there were some other things that were kind of happening about the same time that we started this. Want to give credit to the Washington State Coalition, because it was a series of articles that they had put out, and the YWCA that is up there. And I apologize, I cannot remember the town that it sits in, but I remember contacting them and saying, hey, been reading some of the articles you put out through the Washington State Coalition. Could I get you on a conference call? Because I've got a group that we're trying to look at rules. So they got on a conference call with this group as well. There was also, and I made a note somewhere, there was also that Meeting Survivors' Needs, that multi-state study that was done in 2008 that was released, that talked about some of the most common problems around communal living, but also rules were a part of that as well. And so we had that research. It was one of those things that it was actually an evidence-based project that I'm not sure that we thought about it in that way at the time, but there were these things that were backing it up. The other thing that happened about this same time was the Family Violence Prevention Services Fund also came out with their regulations about, you cannot require somebody to participate in related services in exchange for shelter. Basically, it's like, no, you cannot require support group. You can't kick somebody out of shelter for not coming to support group. And so I kind of think about it almost like the perfect storm of things that happened. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I'm really hearing is how engaged you are with your members and how you built this community where it's safe for people to name things and kind of speak their thoughts out loud without necessarily having the answers or the solutions.
Yeah.
And that you were also open to receive it and reimagine what this can look like, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
even if it sounds like this outlandish idea at first, but that we can use our creativity, we can use our vision, and we can use our relationships to feel our way through this.
Yeah.
And then you were able to tap in to some of the other work happening. And then I love how it then also brings in the kind of the voluntary services piece.
Yeah.
And being able to really have that support as well.
Yes.
To be able to name, this is a core part of our field of trauma-informed services, all of that.
Yeah. Well, and there were these elements. It was interesting because if there is a coalition that wants to try and do something similar, I would also never call it a pilot project, because before people really started to understand what this was, the people that weren't participating, there started to be whispers about the coalition's doing a rules pilot project. Are the coalition going to make us get rid of our rules? And I was like, no, that's not what we're doing. But there was this anxiety. So we probably didn't initially market it as well as maybe what we should have either. But it was interesting. But after the first year, then there were other programs from around the state that are like, hey, how do I get in on this thing? And so it extended out one more year, and we just brought anybody else in that wanted to be a part of it. The other thing I think that made this work is that we made the commitment to provide the space for people to meet. And since we're the most central location for the most part for folks around the state, we used our building, our conference room. We paid for mileage to get there, and we provided food. And I realized sometimes those things maybe don't always seem like the most important, but it made it so that folks could meet in person more often because they were able to do that financially. Yeah. So that's just one other thing that it's like, I think it's a commitment. If you're looking at that, I think that's just one of those pieces that you have to kind of look at to get people engaged with it as well. Yeah.
Yes, really being that connector.
Yeah.